Good morning, everyone. We're up to Parak Aleph, Mishna Zayin. Mishnah reads, Ein tarmin le'b'mida v'le'b'mishka v'le'b'minyan. We do not separate truma by measure, nor by weight, nor by count. So that means that even though, little background, midaraisa, according to Torah law, there is no set amount for truma. You can give one grain, one kernel, and you're done. But the sages instituted that a person who is generous gives a 40th of the grain, middle of the road is 50th, one a little bit more on the miserly side is 1/60th. So even though the Chachamim gave an amount of how much truma should be given, the halacha still is that when you separate the truma, you do not measure it out by volume, you don't weigh it, nor do you count the units of produce. You basically have to estimate. The Chachamim gave an amount, but the Chachamim didn't answer, but you're supposed to estimate it. And it's based on words of the Torah that we derive that when separating truma shouldn't be done in an exact way. It should be done in a way of estimation. If you did measure it out exactly, the truma is still a good truma. But the way that it's supposed to be separated is by estimation. Avolterim hu es hamadud ves hashakol ves hamani. Nonetheless, if we're talking about something that already was measured, meaning forget about not with the truma now, but you could take truma from something that is measured by volume or weighed or counted by unit of produce. That means that although the truma has to be by estimation, what you're taking truma from can be exact. You can know exactly how much is there so that you should be able to estimate, which is brought down here in the Yad Avram, that some say you really should do that. Make sure that your estimation is the closest to being really correct. It's best that you know exactly how much you have so that your estimation can be based on that. So that's the second part of the Mishnah that says that, but you do separate from that which is already measured, just that the actual separation of truma is not done by measurement. Now, understandably, when you're talking about, let's say, maasros, which is a tenth, it's a tenth. Right? The Torah establishes the amount. And that amount, we say you basically, there also, I'm not sure if that works by estimation or not, to be honest. No, there actually you have to, when it comes to mice, when it comes to tithing, taking a tenth, you got to know it's a tenth. So there, you're going to be exact. But by truma, where there is no set amount, the Torah said, the Torah basically just said, don't measure it, just take. And that, when it comes to dealing with the rabbinic obligation, the rabbinic amount, again, there too, it's done by estimation. Okay, the Mishnah continues, Ein tarmin besal uvakupa shehem shalmida. You cannot separate truma with a basket of it or a container of measure. Now, of measure here means it's known what the measure is. You look at a soda bottle, it's a liter. So here we're talking about a certain type of basket or a container that it's known what the measurement is. So if you're going to go ahead and you're going to fill up, now you're taking this container and you're using it because it's the most convenient thing that you have next to you to scoop up the truma. You're not trying to measure it, but being that it's a known measure and you are basically filling up the full measure, it appears like you are measuring to other people, and that might lead other people to think that it's okay to measure out truma, and therefore the Chachamim said you do not do that. You do not use you do not fill up this kind of a container that is of a known measure. However, you could go ahead and separate truma using these things halfway or a third of the way. Because if you're just scooping it up and it's a halfway, so again, you're not trying. It's the way you're doing it, just scooping it up, and it may be a known measure, but you just scooped up a part of it. So people look at it and say, well, he's not measuring it out to a third or to a half. It's not that there's that's not what he's intent. He's not trying to do that. He's just scooping it up. If you fill up the whole container, then it looks more like you're trying to work with that measurement. But if you're just using part of the container, then it really doesn't look as much as you are trying to measure it out. And therefore, to go ahead and use that container of a known measure, but just to go ahead and scoop it up till you have a half or a third, which you may know that you're doing. But again, you're not, it's not like intentionally trying to get a third or a half. That's just kind of what comes up. And again, so let me take that back. You're not trying to measure out a third here. Again, that's your estimation. You go ahead and you scoop it up and you try and you estimate a certain amount, whatever the amount is. And when it comes out that it fills up a third or a half, it doesn't look like you're trying to go ahead and use a measurement here, trying to measure it out, because you're not working with the measure of the vessel itself. And this halacha, not using this vessel of known measurement, isn't necessarily it's not talking about it's a measuring vessel. It's not a measuring vessel, but everybody knows it's this amount. If you fill it, it looks like you're trying to fill it to this amount. If you don't fill it, then it just looks like you're just using it, and that wouldn't be a problem. Then the Mishnah concludes, one may not separate truma using half the volume of a sa'ah container, because half of it is a measure. That means like this. This is talking about a measuring container. It is a measuring container that measures a sa'ah, which is a certain volume. And we say like this: you cannot use this measuring container to measure half of it. Why? Because half of it is a measure. These kind of containers, these measuring containers, usually have they have gradual levels. They have on it a half. Like in this case, they basically used to have a half level on it. It was a sa'ah container. It was a sa'ah measuring container, but it used to have a notch, used to have an area to show where it was half. So if you're going to go ahead and use this sa'ah measurement and you're going to measure it to a half, well, if you're working with that half point that's there on the vessel, then you're measuring it to a certain amount. The point of the Mishnah is that even if it doesn't have that halfway mark, it's a sa'ah container. It's a measuring sa'ah container. Even if it doesn't have that half level on it, you still may not use this sa'ah measuring container for half, because since many of them do have that half point on the container, again, people seeing you doing it will think that you are measuring it to an exact amount, and therefore we say do not do it. So again, you're filling this container halfway. You're going to go ahead and give it. So much second here. Thus, one who fills a salt container halfway with produce, which he designates truma, gives the preference of measuring out a precise amount of truma, which might lead others to conclude that it's permitted. Right? That meaning you just went ahead and you wanted to use this thing and you measured it, and it came out and it's coming to a half. Right. The point is, you fill it up to a half. If you fill it up to a half, if it has that halfway mark on it, then it's so whether you intended to actually do a half or not, at the end of the day, it very clearly looks like you're doing a half. Even if it doesn't have that halfway level, since very often these kind of measuring containers do have that halfway level, even if it doesn't actually have it, but you do halfway, it's going to appear like you're measuring it out, and therefore you're not allowed to do that. Okay, that's the end of the Mishnah. We're up to now Mitzvah Ayin Beis 72. Mitzvah loisase shaloi yira hadaim b'bal hadin. A prohibition on the judge to be afraid of one of the litigants. Shenamar, as it says, lo yisagim ripnei yish. Do not be fearful of any man. Ba'afal pi shabal din hu bal zeroya. Even though one of the litigants is a very powerful person, l'yir mimenu shlo yasikenu. You cannot allow it to make you afraid. You cannot be afraid of him to judge properly in order that he shouldn't damage you. So the prohibition itself is saying that you're judging this guy. He's a powerful guy. You're afraid if you judge against him, he's going to get back at you. The Torah says, if you are judging such a case with such a person involved, do not be afraid. You have to judge him as for what he deserves. Now, here's a very interesting qualification. As long as the judge does not yet know where the judgment is leaning towards, He could take himself out of the judgment and say, I'm not getting involved. So basically, it's at a very early stage. He doesn't really see yet where things are going, where things are leaning towards. And at that point, he could actually take himself out because he's afraid. Even if it's because he's afraid, at that point, he can back out. But once he hears their claims, and he knows where the judgment is leaning towards, again, it's not definite, but he knows where things are leaning towards. Again, things could change, but he's already at a point where things are leaning towards one direction. He's not permitted to take himself out of this judgment because he's afraid that one of them may hurt him afterwards. Including this prohibition, a student was sitting in front of his teacher, and in years back, you would have a Rebbe, a teacher, and people would come in front of the teacher front of the rabbi for a judgment. The students would be present, and they would be there to learn and see how the rabbi is judging, and also used to participate. They used to participate in the sense of bringing up points and asking questions. So the situation here is that you have a student sitting in front of his Rebbe. There's a court case, there's a din Torah, a dispute going on in front of the Rebbe. And he sees a reason, or he sees an argument that would benefit the poor man and cause the rich man to be liable. The rich man is a powerful man, and the student is hesitant to say anything because if he helps out the poor man, the rich man may come back to get him. And because of that, the shaisek, he's silent, doesn't say anything. He sees an argument on behalf of one of the litigants, but he remains silent because he's afraid of the other one. He is also transgressing this prohibition, although he is not the actual judge, but he is again involved in participating in the judgment, and he could make a difference in the judgment, and it's his place to do that. If he doesn't do that because he's afraid of other litigants, so again, in a case where we're already into the case, the judge cannot back out anymore. The case has to go forward with this judge. And now this student has an argument to benefit one side over the other, but he's afraid to do so because of the other side, that the other litigant may come back after him. And because of that, he's silent, doesn't say anything. He also is transgressing this prohibition. This applies in all places at all times. Have a wonderful day.